Ilara Vance pushed through the surging tide of bodies, each step a leaden effort in the harsh, fluorescent glare. Her worn duffel bag snagged on a passing cart, a minor indignity in a morning already overflowing with them. Just keep moving, she told herself, disappearing into the anonymous blur. At gate B17, a sea of impatient travelers pressed forward. Ilara sighed, placing her scuffed black carry-on at her feet, her gaze drifting to the boarding announcement board. Moments later, a man in a dark, expensive suit, his face turned away, set down an almost identical black bag beside hers. When the call for her row finally came, Ilara scooped up the nearest bag, barely registering the weight or the slight difference in its texture, swept away by the current of eager passengers. Squeezed into her economy seat, Ilara finally allowed herself to breathe. She noticed him a few rows ahead, the man from the gate. He was engrossed in a thick novel, his profile sharp against the window, a luxurious travel pillow cradling his neck. He exuded an effortless calm, a stark contrast to her own rumpled state, her worn sweater already clinging uncomfortably. Must be nice, she thought, to travel without a single worry in the world. The cabin was exactly as advertised, small, rustic, and profoundly isolated. Ilara let her bag fall with a thud onto the worn wooden floor, the silence a welcome balm after the airport's assault. This was her refuge, her escape. With a tired sigh, she knelt to unzip the familiar black carry-on, eager for a change of clothes and the comfort of her sparse, familiar belongings. Her fingers fumbled with the zipper, pulling it open, but instead of her faded jeans and well-loved t-shirts, a cascade of unfamiliar, impossibly luxurious fabrics spilled out. "What in the—" she whispered, her brow furrowing in disbelief. Ilara cautiously reached in, pulling out a silk shirt that felt impossibly soft, then a sleek, unreleased model of a tablet, and a distinctive, heavy platinum watch. Her own bag held a few paperbacks and a travel-sized shampoo. This was a different universe entirely. Deeper inside, nestled amongst more designer wear, she found a small, leather-bound journal. Her fingers twitched, a battle between innate privacy and desperate necessity. I shouldn't. But what if there's a contact? Flipping through, she saw precise, elegant handwriting, perhaps a script. A small, framed photo slipped out. A man smiling, his face partially turned away, in front of what looked unmistakably like the Trevi Fountain. The light outside began to fade, casting long shadows across the cabin. A cold knot tightened in Ilara's stomach. Her passport, her wallet, her phone charger. All her essentials were in her bag, wherever that was. Panic, sharp and sudden, clawed at her throat. Okay, calm down, she muttered, rummaging frantically through the luxurious contents again. There had to be a business card, a luggage tag, some true, anything, but there was nothing. No identifying information, just the expensive, anonymous trappings of a life she couldn't fathom. Hours later, the cabin was fully dark, save for the glow of Ilara's phone screen. She had been on hold for what felt like an eternity, navigating endless automated menus and increasingly unhelpful customer service representatives. Yes, I understand. She sighed into the receiver, her voice thin with exhaustion. But my bag, it's vital, and this one isn't mine. The polite, distant voice on the other end delivered the final blow. Lost luggage can take days, sometimes weeks to locate, if at all. Ilara hung up, a profound sense of helplessness washing over her. She was stranded, with nothing but a stranger's secrets. The fire in the cabin's small hearth crackled, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. Ilara Vance sat cross-legged on the worn rug, hugging her knees, the warmth a flimsy shield against the chill that still permeated her bones. Not just from the mountain air, but from a deeper, colder place within her. Her gaze drifted into the flames, and the dancing orange morphed into a different kind of heat. The searing, brutal inferno of a professional kitchen, the night her life imploded. Chef Vance, your duck confit is inedible. The memory was still so vivid it felt like a fresh cut. The cold, clipped tone of the lead food critic, his face a mask of disgust. She had known, the moment she tasted it herself, that something was terribly wrong. Not with her recipe, not with her technique, but with the dish itself. A malicious hand, a jealous rival, a dash of something foul. But who would believe her? Asterisk, Ilara Vance's Michelin dreams go up in smoke. The headlines had been brutal, unforgiving. They'd painted her as arrogant, careless, a fraud. The whispers, the pointed stares, the way her mentor had looked at her with pity, then disappointment. It had all crashed down so fast, leaving her with nothing but the bitter taste of injustice. That injustice still burned, a constant ember in her chest, shaping every interaction, every expectation. It was why she was here, tucked away in this isolated cabin, and why the world felt like a place she could never truly trust again. Morning light filtered weakly through the cabin window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the cool air. Ilara, still in her worn sweater, moved slowly around the tiny kitchenette. Her supplies were meager: a few eggs, some stale bread, a lonely apple. She cracked an egg into a pan, the sizzle a pathetic echo of the symphony of a Michelin-starred kitchen. She'd once commanded a brigade of cooks, turning simple ingredients into edible art. Now she was just trying to make breakfast without thinking too much about the vast, empty space where her passion used to be. The scandal had stripped her bare. Not just of her career, but of her confidence, her connections, even her identity. People she thought were friends had vanished. The culinary world, once her oyster, had slammed shut. It wasn't just the public humiliation, it was the isolation that followed, the feeling of being permanently stained. Every attempt to re-enter a kitchen had been met with polite refusal, or worse, thinly veiled judgment. Asterisk, "Oh, you're that, Ilara Vance." The words, unspoken, hung in the air like a curse. She felt like a phantom, haunting the edges of a life she no longer belonged to. It was easier to disappear, to hide, than to constantly fight against a reputation she hadn't earned, but couldn't shake. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, quickly wiped away. She was stronger than that, she reminded herself. Or at least, she tried to be. The shrill ring of her phone startled Ilara, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. Chloe. A flicker of relief, quickly followed by a familiar knot of defensiveness. Chloe was her oldest friend, her unwavering champion, but sometimes her relentless optimism felt like a spotlight on Ilara's own despair. "Hey, stranger." Chloe's voice, warm and familiar, filled the small cabin. "Still alive up there? I was starting to think the bears got you." Ilara managed a weak laugh. "Just enjoying the solitude, Chloe, and dealing with a minor international incident." "Oh? Did you accidentally start a trade war with Canada?" Chloe joked, but her tone quickly turned serious. "Seriously though, Ilara, are you okay? You sound distant." "It's been weeks. You can't hide away forever." "I'm fine," Ilara said, her voice a little too sharp. "Just tired. And funnily enough, I swapped suitcases at the airport. Ended up with some rich stranger's designer threads instead of my own incredibly thrilling worn-out jeans." "You did what?" Chloe gasped. "Well, that's certainly a change of pace. But you know what this means, right? You actually have to interact with a human being to get it back. Maybe it's a sign, Ilara. A sign that you need to stop wallowing and get back out there." Ilara sighed, looking out the window at the dense forest. "It's just a suitcase, Chloe, not a divine intervention. And I've already called the airline. It's a mess." She loved Chloe, but sometimes her friend's relentless push to fix things felt like another burden. Miles away, in a sprawling penthouse suite overlooking a glittering city, Julian Thorne unlatched his own generic black suitcase. He'd barely slept on the flight, preferring to lose himself in a script. Now all he wanted was a shower and a change of clothes before his next round of meetings. But as he flipped open the lid, his brow furrowed in confusion. Instead of his carefully curated travel wardrobe, the bespoke shirts, the Italian leather toiletries, the noise-canceling headphones, he found a jumble of modest, well-worn items. A faded denim jacket, a thick, slightly pilled wool sweater, a small, dog-eared paperback, and a simple, unbranded toiletries bag. A faint scent of cinnamon and something earthy, like fresh herbs, wafted up. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. Well, this is certainly a curveball. It wasn't the first time his luggage had gone astray, but never had he ended up with a bag so utterly normal. It was a stark contrast to the opulent hotel room, the plush carpet, the panoramic city views. He picked up the paperback, The Alchemist, its spine cracked from many readings. No name inside. He sifted through the close, a small, amused smile playing on his lips. This wasn't just a suitcase swap. It was a peek into an entirely different life, one blessedly free of red carpet demands and paparazzi lenses. The door to Julian's suite burst open, and his assistant, a perpetually harried young woman named Brenda, rushed in, phone already pressed to her ear. "Julian! Oh my God, the airline says they can't locate your bag, your custom cufflinks for the gala tonight, your vintage watch, and security is freaking out about the privacy breach." Brenda wrung her hands, her voice escalating into a near panic. Julian, still calmly examining a well-loved pair of hiking boots from the mistaken bag, raised an eyebrow. "Brenda, breathe. It's hardly a crisis. It's just a suitcase. And clearly it's not mine." He gestured to the duffel. "Someone else is probably having a far more dramatic morning than you are, realizing they've got a movie star's designer wardrobe instead of, well, this." Brenda stared at the duffel, then at Julian, her eyes wide with disbelief. "But your persona, your public image, what if they go through your script notes? What if they leak something? This is a PR nightmare waiting to happen." She gestured wildly towards a stack of tabloids on the coffee table, their sensational headlines already a source of constant irritation. Julian sighed, a weary expression briefly crossing his face. "Brenda, the world will survive if I wear a hotel bathrobe for a few hours, and honestly, it's refreshing. For once, it's not about time Mowgli. It's about finding a way to return this person's belongings. They've likely lost everything they need for their trip." His calm voice was a stark contrast to her frantic energy, hinting at a deep-seated desire for a life less complicated by his fame. Julian continued to meticulously go through the modest bag, not out of curiosity for secrets, but a genuine desire to find a clue. He respected privacy, but he also wanted to solve this. He carefully unfolded a linen shirt, and something slipped from its pocket. A crumpled piece of paper, thick, with smudges and stains, covered in elegant looping handwriting. It was a recipe. He smoothed it out, rosemary and fig-braised lamb with saffron risotto. At the top, in a smaller, more formal script, was a name, Ilara Vance, and below it, a stylized logo of a chef's hat with the words, "The Gilded Spoon." Julian's eyes widened slightly. The Gilded Spoon. He remembered it. A small, but highly acclaimed restaurant that had briefly made headlines a few years back, not for its food, but for a spectacular, messy downfall. He vaguely recalled the scandal, a talented young chef accused of sabotage. He pulled out his phone, a sleek device that felt heavy and impersonal in his hand. A quick search. Ilara Vance, The Gilded Spoon. The results flashed across the screen. Old news articles, scathing reviews, a few blurry photos of a woman looking distraught. His initial amusement faded, replaced by a dawning realization. This wasn't just a suitcase swap. This was a story. A story he felt a strange pull to understand. Back in her cabin, Ilara sat at the small wooden table, a worn sketchbook open before her. She was trying to conjure new recipe ideas, but her mind felt as barren as the winter landscape outside. The page remained blank, save for a few half-hearted scribbles that looked more like scribbled anxieties than culinary inspiration. The thought of creating, of sharing her art, felt distant, like a memory from another life. She felt stuck, adrift, her purpose lost somewhere between the airport and this isolated retreat. Suddenly, her phone, lying face down on the table, buzzed with a startling intensity. Ilara jumped, her heart thumping against her ribs. She rarely got calls from unknown numbers, and the unexpected vibration felt like an intrusion, a jarring note in the quiet symphony of her self-imposed exile. She stared at it, a strange sense of dread and anticipation swirling in her gut. Who could it be? The airline? Or the mysterious owner of the designer luggage? Her hand hovered, hesitant, before finally reaching out to answer. A beat of silence stretched, thick with unspoken possibilities. Lara's voice was tentative. "Hello?" On the other end, Julian's voice was warm, calm, and surprisingly gentle. "Hello, is this Ilara Vance?" Ilara felt a jolt of recognition. It was the man from the airport, the one engrossed in his book. "It is. Who's this?" she asked, a guardedness creeping into her tone. "My name is James Thorne, and I believe we have each other's luggage." A wave of relief washed over Ilara, instantly followed by a familiar prickle of wariness. "James, oh, thank goodness. I've been trying to get through to the airline all morning. My bag, it's got all my essentials." "Mine, too," Julian chuckled softly, the sound disarmingly charming. "Though I suspect yours are far more practical than my own. I found a rather intriguing recipe for braised lamb in your bag. Are you a chef?" Ilara hesitated, a familiar blush creeping up her neck at the mention of her past. I used to be. It's a long story." "I have time," Julian said, his voice genuinely curious. "But for now, perhaps we should focus on the logistics. I'm in the city for a few more days. Would you be open to meeting somewhere neutral to make the swap? Perhaps tomorrow afternoon?" Ilara, despite her ingrained caution, found herself relaxing into the conversation. His tone was kind, his interest genuine, not probing. There was a surprising ease, a gentle rhythm to their exchange. "Yes, tomorrow would be great. I'm pretty isolated up here, so a cafe near the airport would probably be best." "Perfect," Julian replied, a hint of a smile in his voice. "I'll text you the details. And Ilara, I'm glad we connected." Ilara's guarded expression softened. "Me too, James. Me too." As she hung up, a strange flutter stirred in her chest. For the first time in months, a tiny spark of genuine connection had pierced through the heavy cloak of her isolation. Maybe, just maybe, this mix-up wasn't such a disaster after all. Ilara Vance smoothed the worn fabric of her sweater for the 10th time, her reflection in the cafe window showing dark circles beneath her eyes, but a hint of something else. A faint, unbidden flush on her cheeks. She was early, of course. Always early. Always prepared. Even when preparing for something as mundane as a suitcase swap. Yet, an unexpected flutter stirred in her chest. Just nerves, she told herself, from being around people again. But a small rebellious part of her wondered about James, the man with the kind voice on the phone, the one who hadn't sounded dismissive or bored, the one who had somehow found her, against all bureaucratic odds. A man entered, his presence a quiet ripple rather than a grand entrance. He wore a simple, dark cashmere sweater that still managed to look expensive, and his dark hair fell perfectly, just as she'd noticed on the plane. And those eyes, a piercing, intelligent blue. Ilara felt a peculiar jolt of recognition. This was the man from a few rows ahead, the one engrossed in his book. He wasn't overtly handsome in a flashy way, but there was an undeniable magnetism, a quiet confidence that drew her gaze. "Ilara?" he asked, a warm smile spreading across his face. "James?" she replied, a shy smile returning. The suitcase exchange was smooth, almost anticlimactic, her worn black duffel, his sleek, identical one. But as their hands brushed, a spark, an unspoken acknowledgement passed between them. They lingered, the initial awkwardness dissolving into an easy conversation about the flight, the absurdity of the mix-up, and the unexpected quiet of her mountain retreat. He listened intently when she spoke, his gaze steady, making her feel seen in a way she hadn't been in years. They talked about travel, about unexpected discoveries, and Ilara found herself laughing, a genuine, unburdened sound she hadn't realized she'd missed. There was a shared reluctance to part, a silent question hanging in the air when he finally suggested, "Well, I suppose that's everything." They stepped out of the cafe, bathed in the gentle afternoon sun, the easy warmth of their conversation still enveloping them. Then, in a blink, the world exploded. A cacophony of shouts, a blinding barrage of flashbulbs, and the sudden, overwhelming crush of bodies. "Julian! Julian Thorne!" "Who's the mystery woman, Julian?" "Is this your new girlfriend, Thorne?" The questions came in a rapid-fire assault, each one a sharp, disorienting blow. "Julian, no, Knocked mano. Knocked mano. Moved with an instinct born of countless such encounters. He swore under his breath. A terse. Damn it. And his arm shot out, pulling Elara fiercely against his side, shielding her from the aggressive swarm of photographers. Her face was pressed against his expensive sweater. The scent of his cologne now mixed with the acrid smell of ozone from the camera flashes. She could feel his heart hammering against her, or maybe it was her own. The sheer, terrifying chaos was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was a maelstrom, and she was caught in its terrifying center. The name echoed in her ears, shouted by dozens of frantic voices. Julian Thorne! A name ricocheted through her mind, each syllable a hammer blow. It couldn't be. Not him. Not James. But then, through the blinding flashes in the jostling crowd, she saw his face. No longer just the kind stranger from the plane, but his face. The sharp jawline, the intense blue eyes, the slight scar above his eyebrow. Suddenly, undeniably, it was him, Julian Thorne, the movie star. The face that graced magazine covers, the blockbuster billboards, the late-night talk shows. The man she had unknowingly shared a flight with, laughed with, and now was being shielded by. Stunned, betrayed, Elara felt the ground shift beneath her. The warmth of his arm around her turned to ice. He knew. He knew who he was, and he let me believe. The anger, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of her shock. She recoiled, a silent scream building in her throat, as the world around her spun into a dizzying montage of tabloid headlines she hadn't yet seen, but knew were coming. The next morning, the internet was a wildfire, and Elara Vance was the fuel. Headlines screamed across every major gossip site and entertainment blog, each one more sensational and accusatory than the last. Mon in Time, asterisk, disgraced chef Elara Vance stalks Julian Thorne engineered meet cute at airport, asterisk. Asterisk, culinary catastrophe turns celebrity chaser, Thorne ambushed by obsessed fan. Asterisk, is Julian Thorne's new romance a PR stunt or a stalker's scheme? Asterisk. Photos of Elara, caught off guard in the chaos, looking disheveled and shocked, were plastered everywhere. Her hair was a mess, her eyes wide with fear. Beside them, meticulously curated shots of Julian Thorne, handsome and composed, albeit looking concerned, underscored the cruel contrast. Old articles detailing her restaurant scandal were dredged up and linked, painting a picture of a desperate, manipulative woman seeking fame through any means necessary. The narrative solidified with terrifying speed. She wasn't an accidental acquaintance, she was a calculated opportunist. A stalker. The comments sections exploded with vitriol, painting her as pathetic, unhinged, and a disgrace to her profession. The public had already made up its mind. Elara stared at the screen, a cold dread seeping into her bones. The words blurred, but the message was sickeningly clear. She was branded. Again. The whispers, the judgment, the unfair accusations. It was all back, amplified 1,000 times by the digital echo chamber. Her past scandal, the one she had fled to the mountains to escape, was now intertwined with this new fabricated one, creating a monstrous, inescapable narrative. A stalker. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. She felt a profound sense of injustice, a crushing weight of public humiliation. But beneath it all, a searing betrayal. Julian. He had allowed this. He had known, and he had let her walk into it, a lamb to the slaughter. His kindness, his easy charm, the way he had listened. It was all a lie, a performance. A way to reel her in, perhaps, for some twisted celebrity drama. The thought made her stomach churn. Tears streamed down her face, not of sadness, but of pure, incandescent rage. With a guttural cry, Elara hurled her phone across the room, watching it shatter against the rough-hewn stone fireplace, a final, desperate act of defiance against a world that refused to see her. Her cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. The phone, though broken, still felt like a phantom limb, buzzing with unseen condemnation. A few hours later, her landline, a relic she rarely used, rang insistently. It was Chloe. Ilara, what the hell is going on? My phone hasn't stopped ringing. Are you okay? Did you know who he was? Chloe's voice was a frantic mix of concern and thinly veiled accusation. No, of course not, Chloe, Ilara cried, her voice cracking. It was an accident. The suitcases, remember? He was just James from the flight. I had no idea until the paparazzi attacked. But the headlines say, they're saying you engineered it, Ilara, Chloe said, her voice softer now, but the initial doubt had already landed its blow. The sting was worse than any tabloid headline, because it came from the one person she trusted. I mean, it's Julian Thorne, the biggest movie star in the world, and your past, it just looks so bad. It looks bad because they want it to look bad, Ilara shouted, clutching the receiver as if it were a lifeline. I didn't do anything. I just wanted my damn suitcase back. Chloe sighed, a weary sound that spoke volumes. Okay, I believe you, but what are you going to do? This is a disaster. It's worse than before. Ilara didn't have an answer. She just felt the familiar, suffocating cloak of isolation descend once more. She mumbled a hasty goodbye and hung up, the click of the phone echoing the sound of another door slamming shut. Even Chloe, her staunchest defender, had hesitated. She was truly alone. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of silence and the dull throb of a heart that felt perpetually bruised. Ilara Vance had retreated, not just from the world, but from herself. The small cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage, yet she couldn't bring herself to leave its confines. Her phone, a cruel tether to the outside, lay discarded on the rough-hewn table, a constant flicker of Julian's name illuminating its screen. Calls she ignored. Texts she deleted without reading, not because she didn't see them, but because to acknowledge them would be to acknowledge the gaping wound in her chest. Every vibration was a fresh jab, a reminder of how easily she had been fooled, how readily she had allowed a fleeting moment of kindness to crack open the defenses she had painstakingly built. He played me, she thought, the bitterness a familiar, acrid taste. He saw an opportunity, a story, nothing more. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, mirroring the shadows that clung to the corners of the cabin, reflecting her own weary despair. She huddled under a thick woolen blanket, the chill of the mountain air a meager comfort against the cold dread in her soul. The smell of pine needles and damp earth did little to clear the air thick with ghosts. Every attempt to calm her racing thoughts brought her back to the past, a relentless loop of betrayal. She closed her eyes, and the cabin walls dissolved, replaced by the gleaming, chaotic kitchen of the Ember, her Michelin-starred restaurant. The memory was sharp, a shard of glass in her mind. The perfectly plated dish, the envious glares of a rival chef, the hushed whispers, the devastating review that accused her of cutting corners, of sabotaging her own creation. She hadn't, of course. She knew who had, but the truth had been a fragile thing, easily crushed under the weight of a public narrative, fueled by a rival's carefully placed lies. The media, hungry for scandal, had devoured her reputation, leaving her professional life in ashes. They branded me a fraud then, she thought, a fresh wave of resentment washing over her. And now, a stalker. The images flashed, the scornful headlines, the accusatory faces, and then, superimposed over them all, Julian's charming, disarming smile from the cafe. His kindness, his easy conversation, it felt sickeningly familiar. A calculated move, a setup. He, too, had seen a story, a narrative to exploit, just like her rival had. The thought hardened her resolve, clenching her fists until her knuckles were white. Plying, never again. Miles away, in a penthouse hotel suite that felt more like a gilded cage, Julian Thorne stared at his phone, a furrow deepening between his brows. He'd left another voicemail, his voice raw with genuine concern. Ilara, please, just answer. I know this looks bad, worse than bad. But it wasn't a setup, I swear. The paparazzi, it was an ambush, not something I orchestrated. Just let me explain, please. I'm so sorry. His thumb hovered over the call button again, a desperate tick. He'd sent a dozen texts, each one more pleading than the last. Are you okay? I'm worried. Please, I need to know you're safe. Ilara, don't let them twist this. Let me help you set the record straight. The silence on her end was a heavy weight, a wall he couldn't penetrate. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his luxurious surroundings mocking his internal disquiet. The city lights outside blurred, reflecting the turmoil within him. He just wanted to talk to her, to the woman he knew as James, the one who saw him, not the movie star. His publicist would kill him if she knew how many times he'd tried to reach a civilian caught in his fame's crosshairs. But he didn't care. He had to make her understand. The news cycle was a ravenous beast, but Julian was determined to starve it of its preferred narrative. He had pulled strings, insisted on an impromptu press conference, much to his publicist's audible displeasure. "Julian, this is precisely what they want. You're feeding the beast," she'd hissed. But he was resolute. Standing at the podium, flashbulbs popping like angry stars, he looked directly into the cameras. "I want to be unequivocally clear," he stated, his voice calm but firm, a stark contrast to the frantic energy around him. "The allegations against Ms. Alara Vance are entirely false. There was an accidental suitcase exchange at the airport, a genuine mistake. She is not a stalker, nor did she engineer anything. She is an innocent person who has been unfairly dragged into a media frenzy because of my profession." He fielded skeptical questions, refusing to be drawn into further speculation, his gaze unwavering. His publicist, standing rigidly to the side, looked like she might spontaneously combust, but Julian held his ground. He knew his words were a drop in the ocean of scandal, but he had to try. He had to defend her, even if she couldn't hear him. Night settled over the city, the lights of the metropolis a glittering tapestry far below Julian's penthouse suite. He stood at the massive window, a solitary figure against the vast expanse, feeling utterly disconnected. His life was a performance, a constant act. Every public appearance, every carefully curated interview, every smile for the camera, it was all a part of the Julian Thorne persona. He yearned for anonymity, for a moment where he wasn't a product, a commodity. Alara had given him that. For those few hours, he had been just James, a regular guy exchanging suitcases with a fascinating, fiery woman. She hadn't known his face from a billboard, hadn't cared about his box office numbers or his latest endorsement deal. She had seen Shaq her him. And that, he realized, was why this cut so deep. He looked down at the crumpled, oil-stained recipe he still held in his hand. Alara's recipe. A testament to her passion, her talent, and a life that felt gloriously, painfully real. He missed the ease of their conversation, the genuine spark he'd felt. Fame was a burden, a gilded cage, and sometimes he wished he could trade it all for a quiet, authentic connection. The cabin, once a refuge, now felt like a prison. Alara paced, her thoughts frantic, circling the same desperate conclusion. She couldn't stay here. The internet, however remote her location, still found her. Every notification, every fleeting thought of checking the news, was a reminder of the public spectacle her life had become. She grabbed a small duffel bag, her hands shaking slightly. "Run," a voice inside her urged. "Run away. Start over. Somewhere no one knows your name. No one knows the chef who sabotaged her own restaurant, the woman who supposedly stalked a movie star." She pulled out a tattered map, tracing imaginary lines across unfamiliar landscapes. Alaska? New Zealand? Anywhere but here. The thought of facing another wave of judgment, another round of whispers and accusations, was unbearable. She couldn't do it. Not again. Just as she considered abandoning everything, leaving the cabin and all its painful memories behind, a sharp, insistent knock echoed through the quiet space, making her jump. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The sharp rap on the cabin door startled Alara, making her jump. She'd been staring blankly at the unlit fireplace, replaying the awful headlines in her mind for the 100th time. Another knock, more insistent this time. "Alara? I know you're in there. Open up, or I swear I'll kick this flimsy door down myself." It was Chloe. Only Chloe would drive 3 hours into the mountains without an invitation, her voice already laced with that familiar mix of exasperation and fierce loyalty. Lara sighed, dragging herself off the worn armchair. She opened the door just enough for Chloe to squeeze through, then immediately tried to close it again. "Don't you dare," Chloe said, wedging her foot in the gap. She pushed her way in, her eyes scanning Ilara's disheveled appearance and the messy cabin with unconcealed dismay. "What is this, a hermit convention? You look like you've been living in a cave. And for the love of all that is holy, pick up your phone. Julian Thorne has been trying to reach you non-stop." Ilara flinched at the name. "He can try all he wants. I have nothing to say to him. He orchestrated this whole thing." Chloe threw her hands up. "Ilara, I know you're hurt, but what if you're wrong? What if he really is genuinely sorry? Have you even listened to his voicemails? Or seen his press conference? He defended you. He said it was all a misunderstanding. You're letting your past wounds dictate your present, and it's not fair to either of you." Ilara turned away, her gaze drifting to her discarded phone on the coffee table, its screen dark and silent. A tiny, almost imperceptible crack appeared in her hardened resolve. After Chloe, with a parting hug and a stern warning to think, really think, finally left, the cabin felt eerily quiet. Ilara paced, the silence amplifying Chloe's words, echoing them in her head until her cynicism began to feel less like protection and more like a cage. What if I'm wrong? The question, once unthinkable, now burrowed deep. With a sigh that carried the weight of days of self-imposed isolation, Ilara retrieved her phone. Dozens of missed calls, even more texts, all from Julian. She scrolled past them, a knot tightening in her stomach. Then, she opened her browser and typed his name. The search results were a dizzying array of tabloid headlines. But beneath them, she found older interviews, talk show appearances from years ago, before his current blockbuster fame. She watched a clip of a younger Julian, awkward and earnest, discussing the pressures of early fame, the constant scrutiny, the way his words were twisted, his intentions misconstrued. He spoke about feeling like a product, not a person, about yearning for a semblance of normalcy. A strange vulnerability shone through his polished celebrity facade, a flicker of something raw and honest that resonated with Ilara's own experience of being branded, mislabeled, and stripped of her true self. Her defensive walls, so carefully constructed over years, began to tremble. Could it be? Could someone like Sober Days understand what it felt like to be so utterly, publicly misrepresented? She looked towards the door, a decision forming, a terrifying, exhilarating possibility. Hours later, as the last rays of sun bled across the mountain peaks, painting the cabin windows in hues of orange and purple, a soft but deliberate knock sounded. Ilara's heart leaped into her throat. She hadn't expected him, not really, not after all this time. She had spent the afternoon in a whirlwind of internal debate, arguments with herself, and hesitant hope. She walked to the door, her movements stiff, every muscle screaming caution. Peeking through the peephole, her breath hitched. There he stood, Julian Thorne, movie star, but looking nothing like the impeccably dressed, confident man from the cafe. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion, and his expensive jacket seemed to hang a little too loosely on his frame. He looked genuinely distraught, a stark contrast to the composed celebrity the tabloids portrayed. He caught her eye through the tiny lens. "Ilara?" His voice, muffled by the door, was a low plea. "Please, just let me talk." Her hand trembled on the doorknob. Every instinct screamed at her to keep it closed, to protect herself from further hurt, from the dazzling, dangerous world he inhabited. But another, quieter voice urged her forward. A voice that remembered the unexpected kindness in his eyes at the airport, the easy laughter in the cafe, the shared relief of their first phone call. With a gulp, she unlocked the door, slowly pulling it open. He stood there, a hurricane of celebrity and sincerity on her quiet porch. The air between them crackled with unspoken accusations, with lingering hurt, and with a desperate, burgeoning hope. Julian stepped inside, his gaze never leaving hers, and closed the door softly behind him, sealing them both in the tense, isolated space. "How could you?" Ilara's voice, when it came, was a raw whisper, quickly escalating to a furious tremor. "How could you do that to me? You knew what happened to my career. You knew what it felt like to be publicly shamed. And you just used me? For publicity? For some kind of twisted meet-cute that would sell magazines?" Her hands clenched into fists, her body vibrating with a pain that felt all too familiar. "You let me believe you were just, James, a kind stranger, You let me open up to you, tell you everything, and all the while, you were just setting me up for another public spectacle." Julian stood still, absorbing her words, his expression a mixture of profound regret and quiet resolve. He didn't interrupt, didn't flinch from her accusations. When she finally paused, breathless, tears stinging her eyes, he took a deep, steadying breath. "Ilara," he began, his voice low and earnest, "I can't apologize enough for what happened with the paparazzi. It was a nightmare, and I would never, ever wish that on anyone, especially not you. I hated every second of it. And I swear to you, on everything I value, I did not orchestrate that. I would never use you, or anyone, in such a cruel way." He met her gaze, his blue eyes unwavering. "I know how it looks. I know why you're angry. But please, believe me when I say my intentions were never malicious. My kindness, my interest in you, that was genuine. The paparazzi were an unfortunate, terrible accident that I deeply regret." He paused, his shoulders slumping slightly. "But there's more to it, Ilara. More to why I didn't tell you who I was. And more to why I understand exactly how it feels to be misunderstood by the world." Julian took a tentative step closer, his gaze searching hers, looking for any sign that she might be willing to listen. "My whole life, since I was a teenager, I've been Julian Thorne, the movie star. The public persona, the guy on the magazine covers. And everyone, I mean everyone, wants something from him. Money, fame, connections, a story." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of weariness. "I've been used, Ilara. By friends, by lovers, by people I genuinely thought cared about me. They saw the celebrity, not the person." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the quiet cabin. "That's why I use James sometimes. It's my middle name. It's a way to be just me. To have a conversation without all the filters, without the expectations, without someone trying to leverage me for their own gain. When I sat next to you on that plane, and then when I found your suitcase, it was just intriguing. I saw your recipe, your name, remembered the headlines vaguely, but my offer to help, my taking your bag, our conversation at the cafe, that was all time each one of mine, James. The person who was charmed by your dry wit and impressed by your resilience, even when you were exhausted." Ilara watched him, her anger slowly, reluctantly giving way to a different emotion, surprise. She'd always imagined his life as one of effortless privilege, detached from the gritty realities of her own. But his words painted a picture of a different kind of prison, a gilded cage built of public perception and constant scrutiny. She saw the guarded demeanor in his eyes, the subtle way he held himself, a reflection of her own self-protective walls. He wasn't just a celebrity. He was someone who had also learned to be wary, to protect his true self from a world eager to consume him. "When the media distorted your story, twisting it into something ugly and false," Julian continued, his voice softening, "I felt a cold dread because I've lived it. Early in my career, when I was first starting out, there were stories about my family. My parents had their own struggles, like any family, but the tabloids blew it up, sensationalized it, made it sound like we were some broken, desperate circus act." He looked away for a moment, a flash of pain in his eyes. "It taught me that the truth doesn't matter to them, only the narrative, and once they brand you, it sticks." He turned back to Ilara, his gaze intense. "So when I saw those headlines about you, calling you a stalker, saying you engineered a meet-cute, I understood. On a visceral level, I understood the injustice, the humiliation, the feeling of having your entire identity rewritten by strangers for their own profit. It's a violation, and it infuriated me." Ilara felt her throat tighten. He wasn't just sympathizing, he was empathizing. He had walked a different path, but the scars, the deep-seated mistrust of public perception, were alarmingly similar. The weight of her anger, so heavy moments before, began to lift, replaced by a profound sense of shared understanding. Their eyes met, and in that quiet moment, the vast chasm of their different worlds seemed to shrink, bridged by the shared, painful experience of being branded, misjudged, and misrepresented by a world that cared more for a story than for the truth. Ilara felt the last vestiges of her anger drain away. replaced by a profound, almost dizzying relief. Julian's words, his raw honesty, had chipped away at the formidable wall she had built around her heart. It wasn't just his story mirroring hers. It was the genuine distress in his eyes, the way his voice had cracked with the pain of his own past betrayals. He wasn't just a celebrity. He was a man who understood what it felt like to be misunderstood, to be used, to have his truth twisted by a ravenous public. A sob caught in her throat, small and unexpected. I'm so scared," she whispered, the words barely audible. "I've been hurt so many times, Julian. My career, my reputation, my trust in people. It all feels like a house of cards, ready to collapse with the slightest breeze. It's easier to just assume the worst, to protect myself." Tears, hot and unwelcome, traced paths down her cheeks, a stark contrast to the bitterness that had stained them for days. This wasn't anger anymore. It was the vulnerable ache of a heart finally admitting its pain. Julian reached out, his hand gentle as he cupped her face, wiping away a tear with his thumb. His touch was warm, steady, grounding. "I know, Ilara," he said, his voice a soft murmur, resonating with the sincerity that bypassed all her defenses. "And I promise you, I will spend every day proving that you never have to feel that way with me. I won't lie to you, I won't mislead you, and I will always, always stand by your side. You are not alone in this, not anymore." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Ilara didn't flinch, didn't pull away. She looked into his kind blue eyes, seeing not the movie star, but the James, who had exchanged pleasantries with her at the airport, the man who had been genuinely intrigued by her lost recipe. A fragile, hopeful smile touched her lips. She believed him. And in that quiet, intimate cabin, a new foundation of trust began to form, stronger than any tabloid could ever shake. Julian's hand moved from her face to gently take both of hers, his gaze firm and reassuring. "Now, about these headlines," he began, a determined glint in his eyes. "We need to set the record straight, publicly, not just for me, but for you. You deserve to reclaim your narrative, Ilara." He paused, studying her face. "I want us to do a joint interview, a live one. You tell your story, the real story, and I'll be right there, supporting you, confirming every word, and denouncing the garbage the tabloids have been printing." Ilara's breath hitched. A joint interview? Facing the media again? The very thought sent a fresh wave of terror through her, conjuring images of flashing cameras and accusatory headlines. Her past scandal, the public humiliation, it all rushed back. "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. I can't go through that again. The last time it ruined everything." "You won't be alone this time," Julian insisted, his grip on her hands tightening gently. "And this time, you'll be telling your truth, not theirs." It's not about being fearless, Ilara. It's about being brave enough to do the right thing, even when you're terrified. You've been brave your whole life, standing up after every fall. This is no different. It's your chance to heal, to show them who you really are. Ilara looked at their intertwined hands, then at his unwavering gaze. She took a deep, shuddering breath. He was right. This was her chance. Days later, Ilara sat in a brightly lit television studio, the warmth of Julian's hand, a steady anchor on her arm. The cameras glared. The lights were blinding, but this time, the fear was overshadowed by a quiet resolve. She was no longer just the disgraced chef, no longer the tabloid's fabricated stalker. She was Ilara Vance, and she was finally telling her truth. The interviewer, a kind-faced woman, began with a sympathetic tone. "Ilara, the public has heard many versions of your story. Today, we want to hear yours." Ilara took a deep breath, her voice surprisingly steady. 2 years ago, my career was destroyed by a lie. I retreated, believing I was beyond redemption. Then, at an airport, I accidentally swapped suitcases with James. Julian. She corrected herself, glancing at him with a soft smile. "It was an honest mistake. We met, we talked, and for a few hours, I felt seen, not judged. Then the paparazzi descended, and suddenly, I was a stalker, engineering a meet-cute. It was painful to be branded again, to have my vulnerability twisted into something malicious. Julian leaned forward, his voice firm and clear. Ilara is a woman of incredible integrity and strength. There was no engineered meet-cute. There was a simple human connection between two people who, at that moment, were just strangers. The press, in their relentless pursuit of a story, chose to sensationalize and distort the truth. It was a gross misrepresentation, and I stand here today to unequivocally defend her character. He looked directly into the camera, his gaze unwavering. Ilara Vance is a talented chef, a kind soul, and someone who deserves far more respect than she has been given. A wave of silent relief washed over Ilara, a profound sense of vindication washing away years of shame. The cabin, usually a sanctuary of solitude, now hummed with a different kind of energy. Ilara sat on the worn couch, her phone clutched in her hand, scrolling through a deluge of messages. This time, they weren't hateful. They were messages of support, of apology, of solidarity. Hashtag Justice for Ilara was trending, alongside hashtag Truth about Julian. Chefs she admired were posting messages, offering encouragement, even job opportunities. People were recounting their own experiences of being misjudged. "Look," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, showing Julian a screen full of positive comments. They're believing me, they're apologizing." A tear escaped, but this one felt cleansing, not bitter. It was the tears of a heavy burden finally being lifted. Julian sat beside her, his arm going around her shoulders, pulling her gently into his side. He didn't say anything, just watched her, a quiet, contented smile on his face. He knew this feeling of vindication, of having the truth finally acknowledged, was more precious than any award. Her name, Ilara Vance, was finally cleared. The world was seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time in years. Later that evening, as the cabin settled into a comfortable quiet, Ilara turned to Julian, her heart overflowing. The warmth of the fire cast flickering shadows on his face, highlighting the kindness in his eyes. "Julian," she began, her voice soft, "thank you. For everything. For believing me. For standing by me. For giving me the courage to face them." She paused, her gaze searching his. I think I've fallen for you. Not Julian Thorne, the movie star, but James, the kind stranger who saw me, really saw me, before any of the chaos. The one who understood." Julian's smile deepened, a genuine, heartfelt expression. He gently cupped her face in his hands, his touch tender. "And I, Ilara Vance, have fallen for you. For your strength, your resilience, your fierce independence. For the way you fight for what's right, even when you're terrified. You reminded me what it means to be real, to connect without pretense." He leaned in, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're more than just a story, Ilara. You're my story." And then, his lips met hers, a gentle, hesitant kiss that quickly deepened, sealing a promise of trust and love that had bloomed amidst confusion and scandal. It was their first kiss, and it felt like the beginning of everything. Weeks later, the cabin, once a place of retreat, now hummed with a renewed purpose. Ilara, apron tied around her waist, moved with a rediscovered rhythm in the small kitchen, experimenting with new ingredients, her hands dancing with practiced grace. The air was filled with a tantalizing scent of spices and fresh herbs, a symphony of flavor she hadn't dared to create in years. Her joy for cooking, long dormant under the weight of her disgrace, was reignited, burning brighter than ever. Julian watched her from the doorway, a quiet pride in his eyes. He wasn't in a suit, but a comfortable sweater, looking less like a movie star and more like someone finally at home. "That smells incredible, Chef Vance," he murmured, leaning against the frame. "Are we still on for the Crimson Sunset Risotto, tonight?" Ilara laughed, a genuine, unrestrained sound. "Only if you promise to help me with the design sketches for the new place." She gestured to a stack of blueprints on the small kitchen table. "A small, authentic restaurant, just like we talked about. No Michelin stars, just good food, honest flavors, and a place where everyone feels welcome." He walked over, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Sounds like the perfect recipe for a life together," he whispered, and she leaned into his embrace, a shared future unfolding before them. Months later, in the cozy living room of their new home, Ilara leaned against Julian, the flickering fireplace casting a soft glow. Outside, the world still buzzed with headlines and gossip, but inside, they had built their own quiet sanctuary. "It's funny, isn't it?" Ilara mused, tracing patterns on his hand. "The wrong suitcase, the absolute chaos, and it led us right here." Julian tightened his arm around her. "It taught me that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the most inconvenient places. And that true connection isn't about the headlines or the fame. It's about seeing past all of that, to the person underneath. And trusting them," Ilara added softly, "even when every instinct tells you to build those walls higher." Their love wasn't built on the glitz and glamour of his world, nor the shadows of her past. It was forged in misunderstanding, refined by vulnerability, and solidified by unwavering honesty. It was a love that understood the power of perception but chose to live by the truth. The aroma of roasted garlic and fresh basil filled the air, mingling with the happy chatter of diners. The hidden gem, Ilara's new restaurant, was bustling, a warm, inviting space with an open kitchen where she moved with confident grace. Her name, once synonymous with scandal, was now celebrated for innovation and authenticity. Critics raved, customers lined up, and Ilara Vance, the disgraced chef, was a culinary star once more, but on her own terms. Julian, ever the quiet support, sat at a corner table, subtly observing the joyous chaos. He still had his career, his films, but his greatest role, he realized, was right here, watching Ilara thrive. A familiar face appeared in the doorway. Chloe, beaming, a bottle of champagne in hand. "Ilara!" she cried, rushing over for a hug. "You did it! This place is incredible!" Ilara hugged her back, tears welling in her eyes. "I couldn't have without you, and without him," she said, glancing at Julian, who offered a small, proud smile. As Chloe raised a toast, Ilara and Julian's eyes met across the vibrant room. Their journey had begun with a simple mix-up, a wrong suitcase. But it had led them to a new beginning. A love that transcended headlines, and a life more deliciously authentic than either of them had ever dreamed.